A small town suddenly saw thousands of rats appear. And for some reason, they just had to jump into the water in groups. This strange behavior seemed like a sign that something big was about to happen. In this small town in South Korea, there was a massive nuclear power plant. A lot of workers depended on their jobs there to make a living. Its safety system was considered the best in South Korea. It could handle an earthquake of magnitude 8 and even a category 14 typhoon. No matter the disaster, the plant was built to stand strong. But the plant had been running for far too long. After over 40 years, many parts inside had started to wear out. Although the government had suggested maintenance many times to prevent any serious accidents, and even got approval from the president, the prime minister blocked it. He believed it would slow down the country's development. So, the maintenance of the nuclear plant was delayed again and again. But no one knew that a huge disaster was quietly approaching. This man is named Kang Jae. He took over his father's work and continued at the nuclear plant. Even though his father tragically passed away in a nuclear leak accident, there wasn't a better job in town. To survive, he had no choice but to keep working there. His mom and sister-in-law ran a small restaurant in the town. Kang Jae was also in a sweet relationship. But those peaceful and happy days were about to be taken away by a terrible disaster. One day, the former plant manager was fired for offending the prime minister. A new manager was appointed, but he had no experience. He was arrogant, reckless, and looked down on others. Tonight was the last shift for the former plant manager. As night fell, thousands of rats suddenly appeared in the town. They jumped into the sea in groups. It was really unusual. And sure enough, the next morning, an earthquake struck the town. The former plant manager rushed back as soon as he heard the news. Technicians told him that the cooling water valve had cracks. To prevent serious casualties, the former manager proposed evacuating everyone quickly. But the new manager didn't take it seriously. He thought it was just a minor issue. He even criticized the former manager, saying he had no authority to give orders anymore since he'd quit. Meanwhile, the president got the news. He was about to order an evacuation. But the prime minister stopped him. He said that an emergency evacuation would cause nationwide panic. That would then affect the entire country's economy. Hearing this, the president hesitated. At the nuclear plant, some technicians working underground wanted to leave quickly. So, they did a sloppy job on the repairs. But just as they were about to leave the scene, the cooling pipe suddenly exploded. The nuclear material started heating up rapidly. A huge amount of gas leaked underground. The pressure inside kept rising non-stop. If they didn't release the pressure in time, the consequences would be unimaginable. Because the situation was so critical, the president quickly received a proposal to release the pressure. At this moment, everyone realized just how serious things were. If no action was taken, a nuclear explosion would happen soon. When that happens, all 50 million people in South Korea would be affected. The only solution right now was to evacuate the nearby residents. After receiving the orders, the nuclear plant began evacuating the nearby residents. Technicians saw the cooling liquid leaking continuously. And outside, the evacuation had already begun. They realized the nuclear plant could explode at any moment. Everyone rushed to get out. But when they reached the door, they found it had been locked. That's when they realized they had been abandoned. The plant leadership didn't care about their survival. If they didn't find a way out, death was certain. So, the workers decided to team up and open the main door. Meanwhile, the former manager and his colleagues were still waiting for the pressure release order. But the temperature in the reactor kept rising. It was about to reach a critical point. The former manager knew they couldn't wait any longer and had to release the pressure immediately. But when they pressed the button, they discovered that the computer was damaged and couldn't control the ventilation valves. This meant they would have to do it manually. But before they could open the valves, an explosion occurred. The entire nuclear plant exploded into pieces. And all the workers were buried under the rubble. Nearby villages were thrown into chaos. Firefighters arrived on the scene as soon as they got the report. The top priority was to reduce the radiation as much as possible. They needed to ensure that the workers buried under the rubble still had a chance to survive. Kang Jae's girlfriend, Hai, also rushed to the scene. Seeing her boyfriend unharmed, her heart, which had been so anxious, finally felt at ease. But the situation on site was far from optimistic. So she begged Kang Jae to leave with her. But Kang Jae looked at the ruins before him. His rational mind told him he couldn't be a coward at this moment. So he decided to stay and rescue the remaining workers. He told his girlfriend to leave quickly and run as far away as possible. Meanwhile, encouraged by the former plant manager, firefighters, despite their fear of radiation exposure, didn't hesitate to rush in and save people. Hai, realizing she couldn't convince her boyfriend, returned to the evacuation shelter for the residents. She warned the other townspeople that the situation here was extremely dangerous and radiation exposure was imminent. So she urged everyone to escape as quickly as possible. But before anyone could act, the government sent people to lock the doors. Even the communication devices were completely cut off. The goal was to stop residents from contacting the outside world, and to prevent news about the explosion from leaking out. The scene shifts back to the explosion site. At this point, the water prepared by the firefighters had run out. To continue the rescue, they had to drive further to get more water. But going back and forth would take a lot of time. The former plant manager asked why they couldn't use seawater. It turned out that it was against government regulations. Using seawater would completely ruin the nuclear reactor. This would cause a massive financial loss. The former manager, helpless, could only shout and curse. These bastards care more about money than people's lives. But there was nothing he could do either. Time passed. The condition of the rescued workers got worse and worse. Even the firefighters involved in the rescue started collapsing one by one. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, after receiving reports about the spread of nuclear radiation, ordered the experts to seal the reports for his own interests. He strictly prohibited this information from reaching the president. But the situation at the site was far worse than anyone imagined. At this point, the nuclear waste tank near the reactor had developed a huge crack. The cooling water was slowly running out. If the nuclear waste came into contact with air, it would trigger a series of chain explosions. At that point, not just the town would be in trouble, but all of South Korea could be at risk. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency detected the nuclear leak through their sensors. They began withdrawing staff from their consulates. Very quickly, the president and the public found out about this. People started packing their belongings and running away. The streets were filled with panicked screams. Even doctors and nurses at hospitals started abandoning their work to evacuate. Residents in the resettlement area, seeing the chaos, worked together to break down the main gates and got on buses to flee far away. The entire nation was on the verge of collapse. At this moment, the president sat in his office, looking exhausted. As the leader of a country, unable to solve his people's problems, he felt deeply disappointed. At that moment, his wife walked in. She told him that it was the prime minister who had quietly suppressed information, leading to the current situation. Seeing the whole country in such a dire state, the president finally regained his resolve. He led some military personnel, and confronted the prime minister to take command from him. Then, he called the former plant manager. From the manager, he learned the true situation of the nuclear explosion. The president immediately ordered the reactor rescue efforts to stop. He instructed the use of nearby seawater to cool it down. At the same time, he ordered all nuclear power plants in South Korea to shut down. With the help of seawater, the reactor's temperature slowly decreased, and radiation levels began to drop. But the cracks in the nuclear waste tank still hadn't been fixed. If this went on any longer, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, the radiation levels inside were extremely high, and the water was already knee-deep. Completing the repairs seemed almost impossible, unless they sacrificed a lot of people to maintain it continuously. The president then held a press conference. He first apologized to the people, and explained the current situation to everyone. He expressed hope for brave volunteers to step up and complete these emergency repairs. Kang Jae, lying in his hospital bed, saw this news. He smashed the TV in anger, and condemned the president's actions. He complained that the government was incompetent, and was leaving the people to bear the consequences. At that moment, a young man in the hospital room stood up courageously. He said, "We're nuclear plant workers. No one knows how to run these systems better than us. If we don't go, who will? If we don't tackle this problem, it's not just the public who will suffer. Our families will be affected too. Besides, we've already been exposed to a lot of radiation. Even if we don't go, we probably won't live long. So we might as well go and fight." Hearing this, all the workers stood up one by one. They decided to join the repair team. Even if they died, they would die together. The former manager and the volunteers boarded the bus headed for the site. To avoid any incidents during the repair, each volunteer was given a bottle of painkillers. As the bus passed through the town they once lived in, the workers' eyes were filled with longing. That beautiful place they once knew was now desolate. Before long, the bus arrived at the nuclear power plant. The firefighters stood and watched as they arrived. Everyone knew in their hearts that they were walking into a one-way mission. The volunteers, fully equipped, lined up to enter the nuclear power plant. They were divided into 3 teams for rotating repairs. Each team had only 5 minutes to work. When their time was up, the next team would take over immediately. As the radiation levels rose, some volunteers began to collapse from exhaustion. But no one chose to give up. Just as the repairs were about to finish, a larger crack suddenly appeared. Coolant began gushing out, and the damage was worse than before. Even the best engineers couldn't fix this. Just as the former plant manager was preparing everyone to leave, Kang Jae suddenly came up with an idea. He proposed sealing off the entrance and collapsing the ceiling. This way, the waste tank would stay submerged in water. Although the plan was feasible, time was running out. They needed explosives to bring down the ceiling and block the main door. The task required someone inside to set the explosives, which was incredibly risky. Among everyone, only Kang Jae knew how to handle explosives. So, he had to go in himself. This meant he wouldn't be coming out. But for his country and its people, Kang Jae didn't hesitate. He said goodbye to his family and girlfriend through a video message. Overwhelmed with emotion, Kang Jae began to cry. He cursed his fate for putting him in this situation. He desperately wanted to live. Seeing Kang Jae cry like a child, the president and everyone else began to tear up. Once all the technicians had evacuated, Kang Jae pressed the detonator. With a massive explosion, the crisis was resolved. Besides Kang Jae, who sacrificed himself heroically, other technicians also perished. They had absorbed too much radiation. In the face of disaster, humans are so fragile and small. Humans can create incredible things, but they can also be destroyed by what they create. Kong Jae, a young man full of dreams, gave up his life to save everyone. Perhaps he had foreseen this, and he was ready to sacrifice himself if needed. This marks the end of the movie Pandora. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye and see you in the next videos.